Where have you been? Now, a year is a long time in politics or anything else, and life, the universe, anything. And man, don't I know that. However, an awful lot has happened that we need to catch up on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a journey of the events, the names and the places that got us to where we are now.
Stand by for action. We are about to launch Bloke apart.
So it all starts here in the city around about the millennium, around the year 2000, because bankers just weren't making enough money. Their diamond shoes were too tight, their wallets were too tight, small for their 50s, and there wasn't going to be a government subsidy to pay to upgrade all those, so they had to find a way to do that. Need to make more money. So some bright spark has the idea, why don't we lend money for people to buy homes to people who actually can't afford it? Because that's a good idea. And what we can actually then do is to compensate us for our risk, we'll just put the interest rate on those loans up higher than everyone else, because then it's even less affordable, because that's a great idea as well. And that worked really well. The subprime mortgage started. And then another bright spark had a great idea that what we could do, we can make even more money off these subprime mortgages if we package them up as a bond or a loan with our bank's name on it, Lehman Brothers for example, and then we could sell it to other banks for even more money. And I think we'll make a fortune. And they did. And they're just making unbelievable sums of money at this point, but it's still not enough. Those diamond shoes are still too tight, and they need to have a bespoke wardrobe to fill all their, to get them in like Imelda Marcos. So what they do at this point is they start saying, well, listen, this loan thing is working so well. Why don't we loan money out to people just to buy anything? And they did. So everyone's making an absolute fortune, and it looks brilliant. But they've all forgotten one thing: inflation. So with access to all this cheap money, we're going out and buying just anything that we can't afford. We're living an aspirational and totally unaffordable life on credit. And what's happening is all this money is creating more and more demand that supply is struggling to keep up with. And when you have an imbalance between demand and supply, you get further inflation. So then the Bank of England raises interest rates, and what that does is it hits us all in the back pocket, it stifles spending, and that has a depressing effect on inflation. But the problem is what it also does is it increases mortgage rates, and it particularly increases mortgage rates on very risky mortgages for those people who shouldn't have had them in the first place and aren't very good at paying them. So then what happens is all of these subprime mortgages start to unravel. So the bonds issued on these loans actually then stop paying. And everyone then starts to look inside these bonds issued by Lehman's and other people, and unfortunately it then becomes really clear that those naughty bankers actually don't have any money. So that gets out into the news, everyone flies into a panic, you've got mile-long queues of people outside of banks trying to get all their money out before the banks collapse. We have arrived at the credit crunch. And at this stage, government steps in, and to prevent the financial system collapsing and the end of our way of life generally, invests huge sums of public money, your money, into buying up the banks so that they won't collapse. Then the Bank of England, who are the bank of last resort and also the final ultimate custodians of our trust in money, they step in and they start printing money like it's going out of business. Just casquillions of money, just unbelievable numbers they start printing out. And this gets pumped into the beleaguered financial system to prop it up and stop it collapsing. What it also does, you've got more money, each pound note is worth less, and it depresses interest rates. So the interest rate starts to drop, and that takes the pressure off of companies and individuals and the cost of their debt. Anyway, meanwhile, back in the city, the regulator decides that what they're going to do, they're going to tighten up on lending and who can actually borrow money and who can't. And quite sensibly, it seems that if you can't afford to actually have a mortgage, you're not going to be able to get one. What this ultimately means, though, is that the era of cheap money and easy loans is over. So all those people living the aspirational lifestyle on credit, that's all drying up as well. You're not going to be able to get a new car when you want one. You're not going to be able to get a new telly. Kids aren't going to be able to move out and get a house on their own. You're all going to be living together. Nan's not going to be put in a home when she gets a bit older. It's going to look a little bit like the 1950s. The problem is that as standard of living starts to fall, people don't like that very much. So dissent starts to fulminate, and everyone's looking for someone to blame, and right in the middle of the crosshairs is the European Union, because we don't want all these people coming over here doing a better job than us for less money. So the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, goes to the country and says, do you know, shall we leave the EU? And we did. And obviously leaving the EU, because it's a government operation, it all went absolutely seamlessly and was perfect. Not. Our previously frictionless trade with the EU got totally bunged up with bureaucracy, and we ended up with supply chain issues. Supply chains weren't the only thing getting bunged up, and in 2022 the whole world caught a cold with COVID-19. To prevent the NHS from becoming overwhelmed and the economy collapsing, again, government decided it would pay us all to stay at home for a year, basically, and they borrowed hundreds of billions of pounds so that we could sit at home, buy Netflix, and then save the excess furlough payments. But then something weird started happening. At the beginning of the pandemic, stock markets tanked, and they tanked because investors were worried, how are companies going to make money when, you know, if the world comes to an end and we're all dead? I know it was keeping me awake at nights. But then it started to pick up, and particularly driven by the success of little technical firms like Zoom and what have you, which we've been communicating on. Then what happened was, all the people who are home on their furlough money, they'd watched everything good on Netflix that they'd bought. I mean, that was about a week, wasn't it? Although you should have all bought into Star Trek, which there's months of that. And those people then decided, with the rest of the furlough money, they're going to start investing in the stock market. And that started to push share prices up even further. So after about a year of this, government decided that actually it wasn't as bad as we all thought, and that we could all go out again. So we all charged out to the shops with our additional excess savings from our furlough payments that we hadn't spent, and then we hadn't invested in the stock market. But of course, the people who made stuff, there was no supply of raw materials to make stuff. So we had all this demand, but no supply, and we wanted stuff, and that spells inflation. But the economy is still fragile. So the Bank of England doesn't want to raise interest rates because that'll put more pressure on spending. So what they do is they do nothing. They keep interest rates low, and they keep their fingers crossed that everything's going to work out, because that's a viable strategy which has proved itself effective time and time again. Government basically decided to do the same thing, sit back and wait. And the idea being that what they were hoping was that all the excess furlough payments would eventually be spent, demand would drop off, and inflation would drop. However, Vladimir Putin had other ideas, and he decided, quite rudely I think, to invade Ukraine. And a corollary of that was he switched off the tap on the Russian oil and gas on which we'd all become dependent for our energy. Now you need oil and gas to make stuff, and then you need oil and gas to power the trucks to take stuff to the shops, and you need oil and gas to heat the shops up, and you need oil and gas to heat your home up when you bought stuff that you take home. And unfortunately, when Russia turned the tap off the gas and the oil and its supply, demand didn't stop. So you've got another imbalance between demand and supply, and a massive uplift to the increase in prices and inflation. So now you've got a perfect storm for investors. Supply chains are bunged up. The cost of production has been massively increased by energy prices going up. And at the same time, demand is still high because people have all this excess furlough money and savings burning a hole in their pocket. Inflation was going stratospheric. So the Bank of England was going to have to raise interest rates a lot, and there's a number of upshots from that. The first is that corporate debt, the cost of loans that companies service goes up. That means your profits go down, it means your dividend forecasts go down, it means your share price goes down. The other thing it does, as bank interest rates go up, it makes other sources of income like bonds look less attractive, so the value of bonds also drops. Now what you usually do in a portfolio is you mix the two together because they usually move in different directions. But what happened because of this is they both became correlated and they both dropped together, which is bad. So you've got investments going sideways, you've got inflation racing away, and the cost of living is going bananas. The government decides to act and announces plans to pile more debt on top of the existing astronomical COVID debt, with the idea that this would lead to growth and make more money in the long run. But that all went horribly wrong. It was completely unaffordable, and it massively undermined international confidence in the UK economy. So we're hours away now from the financial system collapsing entirely, and the Bank of England has to step in again. And then government had to reverse everything. I mean, not just a U-turn, but a handbrake U-turn. And they had to do that to compensate for the loss of confidence in the UK economy, basically by the rest of the world, by the announcement that was made by the previous Chancellor. The upshot for you and me is in the very near term, we're going to be paying a lot more tax. And I mean a lot more tax. So here we are, cost of living is massively increasing, investments are struggling to keep up, and there's going to be an enormous tax burden on any returns those investments actually do give you. So if you're thinking to yourself there are going to be some hard yards ahead, you're right. And I guess that means I can't retire just yet.